Chapter 7. Thursday morning. When she woke up the next day, it was hard to believe it was morning. She'd had a restless night. Even though she'd had the last laugh on her unknown caller, and he hadn't called back again, the incident had still worked its way into her nightmares. She wasn't sure what the man's problem was. Or for that matter, she muttered aloud to the empty room, if it's connected to any of the dead bodies I found. He's obviously a bully, trying to scare me by threatening me. Like Mac would say, just because my caller mentioned me dying too, doesn't necessarily mean he's connected with Celeste's murder. She rotated her neck slowly as she sat on the side of the bed. A heavy head landed in her lap as Muggs rolled over and stretched out. She bent down and scratched his long belly, ending up with a cuddle of his ears. She loved those big floppy ears of his. They were so silky. You can stay here, Muggs, but I need a shower. As she hopped up, she saw Thaddeus on her bedroom windowsill, looking at the backyard. She frowned. What are you doing over there, Thaddeus? He turned a gimlet eye in her direction and gave a head tilt toward the window, like saying, Get over here, idiot, and look. About time you finally woke up. She walked toward him and looked out the window. Nothing appeared to be different. She frowned. I don't know what's bothering you, little one, but I don't see anything to be worried about. He gave a half a squawk and ruffled his feathers, almost as if insulted she hadn't seen what he'd seen. She studied the backyard again, but it didn't appear to be any different. But then a lot had been going on in her backyard, so she wasn't sure she could write off Thaddeus's observations that fast. It had taken her a while, but she'd come to realize that the animals really did have some sort of intuitive knowledge of what was going on around them. Turning away, she headed for a shower. When she came out with a towel wrapped around her, Thaddeus still stood lookout at the window. What really bothered her was his focus. He wasn't a predator by nature, though she supposed in the wild he would have been. Something out there he was keeping watch over. She stood beside him, yet again studying the same direction he was so focused on. He stayed fixed on the back right corner. It almost looked like where the fence ended and the creek wrapped around the neighbor's fence. She crouched behind him so she could get a bead on his line of sight. I know you're smarter than I am, buddy. But I sure can't see what you're seeing. He never moved. We could go downstairs and go outside, see what it is, she said, almost as a peace offering. He squawked and hopped onto her shoulder. She chuckled and said, Okay. I'll take that as a yes. But let me get dressed first. And that he didn't want to do. She struggled into her clothes, finally forcibly removing him from her shoulder, putting him on the headboard. Once dressed, she put him back on her shoulder and walked downstairs, Muggs at her side. As she walked down the last set of stairs, she saw Goliath sprawled on the bottom step. She groaned. Why would you choose to lie there? The only acknowledgement she got from him was a flick of his tail. She snorted. You're trying to trip me, aren't you? And then what will you do? She snapped. I'll be laid up with a broken leg, and nobody'll get you food. He rolled over onto his back and stretched. Reminiscent of Muggs' earlier move, she chuckled, stepped over the huge feline, squatted down, and gave Goliath a couple gentle strokes. She straightened and said, I'm loving all this animal time, but I'll turn into an animal myself if I don't get coffee. She walked into the kitchen and put on the coffee pot. All the while she looked out in the backyard, wondering what had bothered Thaddeus so much. As soon as the coffee was brewed enough that she could grab a cup, she snagged an old worn-out chipped mug she decided had more character than the brand-new flashy ones, and opened the back door. Muggs raced through the kitchen and dashed out. He barked and wouldn't stop. She frowned at him. Muggs. What's the matter? Just as quickly, a streak of orange caught her eye as Goliath bolted outside after Muggs. On her shoulder, Thaddeus squawked loud and hard. Okay, she cried out. I'm going. She walked down the rear veranda steps and onto the pathway that led through the garden. As she did, she marveled at how much better it looked without the broken-down fence that cut off her view of the creek. It really opened up the backyard. She couldn't wait to get into her own backyard gardening project. But she wanted to get a workable plan down on paper first. Her ideas were pretty rough so far, and she didn't want to do a half-assed job. She took pride in her work, and it was quite possible her own gardens would be portrayed in a portfolio of what she could do for other people's homes. So Doreen didn't want to mess it up. She strolled down the path, quickening her pace. Mugg sat down, his butt firmly planted on the ground, and Goliath sat beside him. Curious, she joined them for a look. "Hey, what's going on?" she asked. "Nothing is here." But they both looked at her in disgust. She groaned, feeling like the animals all thought she was half-baked. Whereas the general population thought animals weren't as smart as they really were. She stared down at the area, wandering a couple feet forward, but she still couldn't see anything amiss. She stepped out farther, wondering if her animals were looking at the creek, which had become the source of all things curious and wonderful and in some cases deadly. As she wandered up and down the edge of the creek, she turned to look at her 3 animals. Thaddeus had joined the 2 on the ground, and now all 3 just sat there, staring at her as if to say, "Come on. Get it, will you?" The trouble was, she didn't know what they were talking about. She crouched beside the creek but figured if it were something in the water, they would be at the water's edge. Instead, they all stood back about 6 feet, looking almost toward her feet. She studied the distance between her and her animals. Just then her phone rang. Seeing it was Mac, she answered the call. He said, "I might have some more questions for you today." "Sure," she said in a distracted tone. "What are you up to?" When she didn't answer right away, his voice sharpened. "Doreen, talk to me. What trouble are you in now?" She glared into the phone. "Hey, be nice. I didn't have to answer the call, you know." "Why wouldn't you answer the call?" "I had 3 threatening phone calls last night," she said calmly. "But I got the last laugh." "What the hell are you talking about?" he roared. "Why didn't you tell me?" She snickered. The messages were short. "Just bitch, you'll get yours." That kind of stuff, she said. But on the 3rd call, I told him he was getting really boring, and I hung up on him first. I haven't heard back from him since. There was silence, then he said, "Did you taunt some stranger who was threatening you?" Still squatting at the edge of the creek, staring at the ground, she sat back and frowned. "I don't know that I would call it taunting, exactly." "I would. Did you consider the fact somebody out there just murdered a woman and may very well have seen you following them?" "I highly doubt they would think I was any kind of threat," she said. "I mean, let's get real." "Yes," he said, his voice turning hard cold. "Let's get real. You hear an argument. You follow a couple. You hear gunshots. You find a dead body. Then you get threatening phone calls. All in the same frigging day. Is that real enough?" She winced. "Okay, so I didn't mean it that way." "I did," he snapped. And then he groaned. "You have such a strange sense of right and wrong." "Maybe. But at least it's my sense." And she disconnected the call. As she sat here, she muttered, "Damn, damn, damn." Of course he was right. She was still a little out of control, after being so fettered under her soon-to-be ex-husband's thumb. She made all her own decisions now, but was she making good ones? Not necessarily. Mac was pissed she'd followed that couple, and the trouble was, she didn't even really have a reason for it. Well, except for her gut feeling and that the truck had followed the Mini. But maybe they were attending the same meeting? It wasn't like Doreen thought the woman was in any real danger, which would have been a whole different story. But yet, the woman could have been in danger. Doreen just thought the way the couple acted was curious. Doreen would like to say she was psychic, but that would make her a pretty shitty psychic, since she didn't save the woman's life by warning her. So, while Doreen wasn't exactly sure what the hell was going on with her unknown caller, in the end, she decided that Mac had a good reason to be disgruntled with her, what with her not being an accurate psychic and all. She also hadn't really considered that the caller last night was serious. His tone had been too mocking. As if he was pulling a child's prank. She straightened up, threw out her arms at the animals, and said, "You guys need to pinpoint what you want me to see because, from this position, I can't see it." The look on Goliath's face was enough to make her glare at him. "Stop being so arrogant and just show me." And the damn cat got up, did a forward stretch like one of those silly yoga poses with his butt in the air waggling, and his claws came down on something in front of them. She heard a metallic clink as his claws met something hard. She dove forward. "Why didn't you say so?" A small corner of something stuck just barely out of the ground. She'd never have noticed it because it was all rusty and covered in mud. "No clue what this is," she said. She tried to pinch the corner and tug it loose, but it wouldn't move. She needed a shovel. "We have to go back. I need some tools. This looks like it could be a bigger job." She wiggled the rusted muddy piece again, but still got no movement. "And I'd prefer gloves." She looked down at her fingers. Appropriately, Thaddeus squawked at her. She glared. "Don't tell me that you saw this last night, and have kept an eye on it all night? It's hardly big enough to see from where I'm standing, forget about, from the second story of the house." But as she looked up toward her house, she realized it was in a direct line with her bedroom window. She groaned. "Okay, so you guys just might be the weirdest animals on the planet." Muggs barked. She grinned at him. "That's all right. I love you anyway." She grabbed her coffee cup and her phone rang. It was Mac again. She clicked talk and said, "I'm not answering this." And she hung up. And then she realized what she'd done. She threw her head back, her gaze up at the sky, and groaned. "Well, that'll make his morning. If he tells his coworkers, they will all think I'm crazy." Then again, they probably already did. She'd seen the looks on the guys' faces when they arrived at the Carnation Garden yesterday. They had to wonder at anybody who could find bodies on a regular basis, like she did. What no one seemed to understand was that she didn't go looking for them. Okay, so yesterday she was looking, but she wasn't expecting a body. She was searching for carnation beds to see what they would look like en masse. Surely it wasn't her fault somebody had decided to drop the body in the Carnations. Besides, she certainly wasn't seeking any family planning. The last thing she had in her future was the prospect of children. That caused her a pang of regret, because that possibility had always been out there, just never at the right time. But somehow plans changed. Anyway, she needed gloves and a shovel. She marched toward the house and put her phone on the kitchen countertop. "Mr. Smartypants Mac, if you call again, I truly won't answer. I'm leaving my phone right here." She refilled her coffee, grabbed her gloves and shovel, and headed back toward the creek. Maybe, with any luck, this would be something fun for a change. And not something that would lead to more murdered people. She was decidedly not in the mood for murder, unless she was the one who got to help with the investigating of the murdering.